J.K. Faulkner, May 15, 1964, Western Washington State College, Bellingham, Washington. Dear Mr. Faulkner, your letters of March 6 and April 16, 1964, are at hand. Sorry that due to travel absence from Continental Headquarters we have not answered your correspondence sooner. We'll try to make amends and, at least in the preliminary correspondence, answer some of your questions. In Section 2, you state that it is important to indicate the history of the movement from the initial formation of the Technical Alliance until the present. That is indeed, Mr. Faulkner, a tall order. If Technocracy Incorporated had the staff of time, life, and fortune, or the ghost writers available to the President of the United States, we could entertain a project of this magnitude without any qualms whatsoever. But with our limited resources of personnel, may I repeat, that it is a large order. We opened our first office in July 1918 at 107 Waverly Place, just 2 buildings off Washington Square, New York City, and in 1920 we took a whole floor at 23 West 35th Street. We still have at Continental Headquarters one of the Q-Lesser drafting tables we had at 107 Waverly Place in 1918. The Technical Alliance conducted its affairs under the direction of a temporary committee, with Sullivan W. Jones, Secretary. The temporary organizing committee was composed of the following: Howard Scott, Chief Engineer; Frederick L. Ackerman, Architect; Benton McKay, Forester; Carl L. Alsberg, Chemist; Leland Olds, Statistician; Alan Carpenter, M.D.; Charles P. Steinmetz, Electrical Engineer; L. K. Comstock, Electrical Engineer; Richard C. Tallman, Physicist; Stuart Chase, CPA; John Carroll Vaughan, M.D.; Alice Barrows Fernandez, Educator; Thorstein Veblen, Educator; Bassett Jones, Electrical Engineer; Charles H. Whitaker, Housing Expert; Sullivan W. Jones, Secretary. The above taken from the original leaflet printed in 1919 by the Depampalus Press of New York. I was on this committee, as you will notice, as Chief Engineer and Executive Director. It might be interesting to give some of the background of the members of the organizing committee. Frederick L. Ackerman was a well-known architect, designer of buildings for Cornell University, big apartment buildings, etc. Dr. Carl L. Alsberg was Chief Chemist of the Bureau of Chemistry, Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. Alan Carpenter was a prominent doctor practicing in New York City. L. K. Comstock was head of Comstock Company, the largest electrical contractors in the New York area and later the firm that had the entire contract for wiring and lighting the 1939 New York World's Fair. Stuart Chase was originally employed in a government department, Washington, D.C. Dr. Alice Barrows Fernandez was Deputy Director of United States Department of Education in Washington, D.C. Bassett Jones was a member of the firm of consulting engineers, Myers, Strong & Jones, consulting to General Electric, Otis Elevators, etc., etc., and co-developer with Clarence Birdseye of the frozen food process. Robert H. Kahn was president of the American Institute of Architects. Benton McKay originally was in the Department of Forestry of the United States and he worked for a time in the office of the Technical Alliance. He later formulated and promoted and was the father of the Appalachian Trail. His brother was Percy McKay, poet and dramatist. Leland Olds was a statistician who became the first Secretary of the New York State Power Authority and later was appointed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt to be Federal Power Administrator of the United States in his administration. Charles P. Steinmetz of the General Electric needs no further elaboration. Dr. Richard C. Tallman was Professor of Physics at the University of Illinois, and during the latter part of World War I and at the time of the Technical Alliance was Director of the Fixed Nitrogen Research Laboratory in Washington, D.C. He later became Dean of Physics at the California Institute of Technology and when World War II began President Roosevelt made him Atomic and Scientific Representative of the United States on the Combined Chiefs of Staff of United States and Great Britain. John Carroll Vaughan was a noted surgeon, head of Vanderbilt Clinic and chief surgeon of one of New York's hospitals. Thorstein Veblen, of course, you are well acquainted with. He was an educator and occupied various academic positions during his professional career, the last of which was at the New School of Social Research in New York City. Charles H. Whitaker was editor at that time of the Journal of American Institute of Architects. Early in 1920, the Technical Alliance took a whole floor at 23 West 35th Street. It is interesting to note in passing that these same premises were occupied by a section of technocracy in the middle 30s. During our tenure at 23 West 35th Street, Stuart Chase, Benton McKay and others worked in the offices of the Technical Alliance. It is also interesting to note that Mrs. Agnes de Lima was my secretary and stenographer in the Technical Alliance office at that time. She later became secretary of the Corporation of the New School of Social Research, and served until her retirement a couple of years ago. During the time that we occupied the quarters at 23 West 35th Street, we received considerable publicity and interviews published in the New York World and New York Call magazine and other papers and periodicals at that time. We have full-page originals in our scrapbooks here at Continental headquarters. This publicity, while it could not in any way be compared to the publicity of the 30s, still for that time was considerable. Some of it was done by Charles W. Wood, one of the best feature writers of the day, and interviewer of such public figures as Ford, working with Collier's and Saturday Evening Post. It was during this period that we took on several research projects. The largest, the most financially lucrative, was the job for the Railroad Brotherhood, which occurred at the time of the Plum Plan, and it succeeded in breaking the front page of the New York Times. Stuart Chase and Otto Byers were the chief workers, the lead men on this project. Otto Byers was a professional engineer with the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, whom Franklin Roosevelt later appointed Deputy Administrator of the Office of Defense Transportation of the United States. Another project which we undertook, of lesser magnitude than the one of the Railroad Brotherhood, was for the industrial workers of the world. We still have here at Continental headquarters 2 long blueprints listing the interlocking of over 3,000 corporations of the Big Five packers, all totally owned. Equally impressive, of all those in which the five own 50% or more. The Railroad Brotherhood and industrial workers of the world were merely clients of the Technical Alliance and paid for the services rendered. So therefore, referring to your question number 4, of March 6, 1964, was there anything to the suggestion that you were active in the industrial workers of the world outside of the 2 articles you wrote for the One Big Union Monthly? May I say your information is incorrect. I never was active in the industrial workers of the world or in any organization, labor union or political party, nor was I ever a member. The 2 articles in the One Big Union Monthly were not written for the One Big Union Monthly, but were written prior to this, at the time of President Wilson's 14 points, which you will find enumerated in the first article. The reason for the publication in the One Big Union Monthly was that the chairman of the Board of Industrial Workers of the World thought as they were engaging us in a research project, they should have something on which to publicize their relationship and their necessary expenditures. We said we knew of some articles and they seemed to be satisfied with them. We never heard from the One Big Union Monthly after that. In question number 1, you ask what influence Saudi had on our theory of energy determinants. We derive most of our concepts of thermodynamics and energy determinants from the works of J. Willard Gibbs, and we had formulated most of our concepts of modulus and calculus of design prior to our coming in contact with Saudi's wealth, virtual wealth and debt in 1927. Frederick Saudi was a chemist and scientist, completely unknown to us, as we were unknown to Saudi. Saudi formulated his ideas in the British scientific and academic world of his time. He starts out on the correct course, and then gets lost in the muddle of values shortly after page 100, and he loses his original direction and analysis in the mass of money and economic values. Saudi himself, in a newsreel interview taken in his office and laboratory, presented in the early 30s a very nice admission and commendation for the development of technocracy in the United States. This newsreel, I believe, was a Fox movie at tone. We wish Saudi had gone on as he first started, as a chemist and thermodynamicist, and we feel that he would have reached, ultimately, the same conclusions we had arrived at. Question number 2 asks, do you feel in looking back over the period that Veblen, Bellamy, Frederick Taylor had much influence on your outlook of a scientifically run state? We had never read Veblen, nor had we any contact with him until September 1918. He published a series of articles in the Dial magazine in 1919. We had had a series of conferences and seminars in 1919, in which Veblen and others brought the economists and sociologists, and we brought the scientists and engineers. The last 5 Veblen articles appeared in the Dial magazine from May 31, 1919, page 55, to November 1, 1919, page 373. We objected to Veblen's interpretation at that time and his advocacy of a Soviet of technicians, taking the position that social change on this continent would not be analogous to social change anywhere else in the world. The Dial magazine went out of existence as a magazine of public affairs and became a magazine of poetry and culture, and the Johnsons, publishers, took safaris in Africa.